Makkot Daf Beis and Aleph and Amud Beis. Skin in the Game is the name of the shir. It's a pthicha l'Maseches Makkos. We're opening it's an opening shir for this new Masechta of Makot. Cumulative, Shaata, יכול, להזימה. The Masechta just dives straight into the issue. The Masechta deals with three major themes. It's the issue of Eidim Zomamin, which we'll discuss. It's the issue of causing a death, murder by mistake. A person unintentionally murders another person. And it's the din of Makos, which is the name of the Masechta. Makos means a whipping that a person used to get if he transgressed one of the prohibitions of the Torah, for which there wasn't a specific punishment mentioned. It provided he'd been sufficiently warned and there were two witnesses, etc. He got 39 whippings, and that's called Makot. So that's the one idea, the one theme. The other theme is Eidim Zomamim. And the idea of Eidim Zomamin, as we've discussed before, is it's the only way you can be sure that witnesses are false. Because normally, if two witnesses come and say A killed B, and two other witnesses come and say A didn't kill B, you've got 2 against 2. How are you going to know who's telling the truth? But with Eidim Zomamin, the second set of witnesses say, we don't know whether A killed B. That's not what we're commenting on. What we're commenting on is that these two witnesses who are giving evidence that A killed B, on the day that this apparently took place, they were not at the place where the murder took place or where the alleged murder took place. They were with us in a completely different part of the world. And that's called Eidim Zomamin. The din with Eidim Zomamin is they get the same punishment that they had planned to cause the first one. If they gave false evidence to cause death to somebody, they get the death sentence. If they gave false evidence to cause a payment to somebody, they have to pay that particular amount. And the third idea, so the 3 ideas for today that we have to learn about is Makos, which are the 39 whippings, Eidim Zomamin, which we've just discussed, and the third idea is Adut she'ata, יכול, להזימה. If you have evidence that cannot be subject to the laws of Eidim Zomamin, we'll see examples of that, then that evidence is not admissible. Witnesses are only accepted in court if their evidence could be proved to be false in terms of the laws of Eidim Zomamin. If that's not a possibility, then it doesn't work. The psukim that we need to deal with, it's quite a technical shiur today because I've just got to give you the technical foundation for the first part of the Masechta. So those of you who are not, particularly those of you online who are not really into the technical side, just bear with it in the future shiurim later on in this shiur, and in future shiurim we'll get to all the other elements of the Matmonim as well. But here we get the essence of the understanding of the Masechta. Firstly, the love, the prohibition of giving false witnesses in the 10 Commandments. Lo taneh b'reacha ed shaker, you can't give false evidence. That's a prohibition. There is not malchus for that, as the Gemara says on Amud Beis, our Gemara. If a person does give false evidence, there's not a lashing for that particular thing, because the principle is that it's a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh. It's a verbal transgression. For transgressions that are not physically acted upon, they're just conceptual actions, such as speech. You don't get a whipping for that. You don't get malchus for that. And therefore, lo taneh b'reacha ed shaker, the 10 Commandments tell us you can't give false witnesses, but if you do, you don't get malchus for that. There's another area where the malchus comes in. That's in Parashas Ki Tetzei, Ki yeriv bein anashim. If there's an argument between people and they come to the Beis Din, and then there's a complicated verse which again Daf Amud Beis deals with. V'hitzdiku et hatzadik v'yeshiu et harasha. They gave evidence that makes the tzaddik righteous and the wicked person guilty. V'haya im bin hakot harasha, and then while giving a whipping to the wicked person, arba'im yakenu lo, you'll see if you give 40 and no more. So that's where we have the origin of malchus from, particularly for this situation. Now, this can't just be the prohibition of false evidence, because we've already said that's a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh. So when the Torah says, if there's an argument between people and witnesses come and they prove to be false witnesses, arba'im yakenu, our Gemara works out what that means is a case of Eidim Zomamin. In a situation where it's impossible to give them what they wanted to do to the other, there you would give them malchus. We'll get into that a little bit more carefully in a moment. And then there's the third section in Parasha Shoftim, V'darshu ha-shoftim heitev, the judges have to cross-examine the witnesses. V'hinei ed sheker ha'ed sheker ana v'achiv, and if it turns out to be a false witness, v'asitem lo kasher zamam la'asot la'achiv, then you do to that witness what he had planned to cause his brother to suffer. Those are the psukim that deal with our issue. The Gemara in Psochim deals with the cross-examination. In Psochim Daf Yud Beis, the Gemara says there are two forms of cross-examination, bedika and chakira. Bedika means questioning them about the event. What was he wearing when he did it? What weapon did he use? Where exactly was he facing? You ask him a lot of questions about the event. Chakira is time and place. Says the Gemara in Psochim, if a person says on the bedikot, I didn't notice what he was wearing, I don't notice those kind of things, I didn't notice what weapon he was wearing, I don't understand anything about weapons. If he can't answer any of the bedikot, it's still valid evidence. We can still work with it. But if he can't answer even one of the chakirot, amar echad mehem eini yodea, if on one of the chakirot are time and place, I remember what day, but I don't remember what time. I remember roughly what time, but not exactly what time. Anything like that, edutan betela, the evidence doesn't count. Tahavya le idut she'ata יכול, להזימה, because there's no way you can do hazama on such an edut. How do you do hazama? By the second set of witnesses coming and saying, at 11 o'clock on the 3rd of October, 2024, this person wasn't in Yerushalayim where he says it occurs. He was with me in Eilat on the beach. That's all I can tell you for sure. But for that, you've got to know what time and place. So we force the witness to commit to a time and place. Otherwise, we don't accept the evidence. They must commit to an exact time and place so that technically somebody else could come and say, you weren't there at that particular time. And Rashi says there in Psochim, a very important Rashi, Edut שאתה יכול לקיים בתורה hazama harei edut. If this is evidence which gives specific time and place so that a second set of witnesses could technically come and disqualify the first test set by time and place, then that's good. That's havi edut, that's edut. Ve'ilo, lo. And Rashi says, and if they are not specific about time and place, which means there couldn't possibly be a hazama, law, it isn't edut, that's not evidence. It's not a faulty evidence. It's not evidence at all. That doesn't count as evidence. Evidence has to be evidence that is possible to be mezim. And we'll understand why that's so important. So with that, we can get into our Mishnah and our Gemara, which is it's a strange Mishnah. It starts off, but it's sometimes typical of Mishnahs at the beginning of a Masechta. Keitzad ha'edim nasim zomim. How do Eidim become Zomamim? How does this work? How does it happen? What's the process? What's the procedure? So firstly, it doesn't get into a definition of what are Eidim Zomamim, where does it come from, just straight into how. And then the Mishnah goes on to give an exceptional case where you can't give them what they wanted to cause the other one. For example, we're giving evidence that this Kohen is actually the daughter of a divorcee, the son of a divorcee. So he's a halal, he's not a full Kohen. Now the person giving the evidence is not a Kohen. What are you going to do with him? You're going to make him a halal. The Gemara goes on to show there's no way you can implement the principle of hazama in such a case. We don't say this witness now, having been proved false, has to become a ben grusha or ben chalutza, the son of a divorcee, in the same way as he intended to make the other person. He gets the 40 whippings. That's what he gets. Asks the Gemara, I didn't understand the Gemara. You say, how Eidim made Zomamin, and then you give me a case where they're not made Zomamin. The classical case is you do to them what they wanted to do to the other. And you open the Masechta with, but this is the case where you can't do to him what he wanted to do to another. You start with an exception. And secondly, what do you mean, how do you make Eidim Zomamin? We know and we learn further on, you make Eidim Zomamin by somebody coming and saying, you were with us at that time, on that day, and you weren't in that place. That's how you do it. Why doesn't the Mishnah say that? What is going on? So the Gemara says, well, really, this is a continuation of the previous Masechta. Perek Chelek, which we just learned, the 13 or so pages of the last chapter of Sanhedrin, that's really a work on its own. It's just we attach it to Sanhedrin because it's a good place to put it. But it doesn't really belong there. It's a work on its own. The Masechta ends on Daf Pei Tes. And on Daf Pei Tes, the last Mishnah on Daf Pei Tes is Kol hamuzamin makdimin lo tamita chutz mizomamei bat kohen uvoala. You always give the person the death they were trying to cause. The problem is, if a person comes to give evidence that the daughter of a kohen had an illicit relationship with somebody else, and a case of znut. And such a case, the man involved gets the death sentence of chenek, and the woman involved, the bat kohen, gets the death sentence of sreifa. The man is strangulated and the woman is burnt. So what do you give the Eidim Zomim? He's causing both. So the Gemara learns out at the very end of that perek, which is the end of the Masechta technically, that because it says la'asot la'achiv, you do to him what he wanted to do to his brother, you always follow the man, not the woman, in this situation. So he gets chenek and not sreifa. That's where the Gemara was. And now the Gemara goes on to say, and there are other cases where they don't get a death sentence at all, where they get malchus. They get the whipping, they don't get the actual death sentence that they were trying to give to the other. An exceptional, unusual case. But the Gemara is simply continuing from where it left off. I remember when I was learning in yeshiva, Rabbi Mishkovsky was a brilliant, wonderful Rosh Yeshiva, but his hasbara, the way he explained things, was not very good in the early years. It was very difficult to understand his shiurim. And once I just asked him, I said, I don't understand, because I started recording the shiurim, and I just said to him, how did you get from point A to point B? He said, no, there's no connection. It's just after I'd sent point A, I remembered something from earlier on in the shiur, and so I put it in there because I didn't want to forget. I said, how are we supposed to know that? And as a result of that, he said, so what am I supposed to do? That's how I think. I said, but we can't follow you like that. There are two people in the yeshiva who understand your shiur, and I'm not one of them. And that's not okay. That's not a good idea. So what should I do? I said, look, I'm the youngest person in the yeshiva. I'm the most junior person. There's nobody who knows less in the yeshiva than I do. I was new. I just come. Why don't you go over the shiur with me beforehand? If you can get me to understand it, then you give the shiur after that, then everybody will understand it. And to my astonishment, he said, good idea. So on Motzei Shabbos, on Saturday nights, come to my house and we'll learn together. And from then on, every single Motzei Shabbos, we used to learn for hours and hours and hours, preparing the shiur. And he got better and better and better and better. It was wonderful. But it's a little like this. This reminds me of that story. The Gemara starts a new Masechta and says, what are you talking about? Where is this coming from? So no, actually we're continuing from Daf Pei Tes and the previous Masechta, and the Gemara assumes that you understand that that's where we are. It's quite interesting. Since some say Makkos really shouldn't be a Masechta on its own, it's actually a continuation of Masechta Sanhedrin. What's important is the question of Tosfos, which I just want to touch on. Tosfos says, but in this case, if you can't give him what he's causing, he comes and says, Ben Grusha, this Kohen is the daughter of a divorcee. Is the son of a divorcee. We can't make you the son of a divorcee. So you can't implement technically the pure form of the Eidim Zomim. So instead, we give him Makkos. How do we know Makkos? We've got the posuk. We give him the whipping. Ask Tosfos, but then in essence, this is not Adut Sheata, יכול, להזימה. The pure form of Eidim Zomim doesn't work here, doesn't apply here. And if this is not Adut Sheata, יכול, להזימה, how does it work altogether? And Tosfos answers it by saying, in this case, the fact that he's getting the malchus, the fact that he gets these lashes, that is Adut Sheata, יכול, להזימה, and it works. And I just want to give you the underlying principle then of Eidim Zomim, and that is, in the secular legal system, even in Israel, there's very little downside to false evidence. If you want to, and there were many cases in the whole Me Too movement, there were some very bad people, men who were caught with it and got into trouble as they ought to have got into trouble with it. But there were a lot of innocent people, women who wanted to extract money from the guy, women who wanted to extract favors from the guy, women who had a grudge against the guy, who started the Me Too movement. And they would claim that he did something to me. There's no evidence. The case gets thrown out, but his reputation is finished. So she's done incredible damage, and there's no downside. Sorry, we don't accept. We don't accept it. So it's thrown out. A witness comes, and the court doesn't accept the witness. Sorry, your evidence is not accepted. And what? So what stops a person from giving false evidence, really, other than his own conscience. And here we have a principle, and that is to really trust somebody, they need to have skin in the game. If somebody gives you advice and it makes no difference to them whether their advice is right or not, somebody says you should buy such and such a share, you've got to ask yourself, and if you're wrong, are you going to compensate me? Or have you bought such and such a share? He says, no, I don't invest in the stock share, but you should buy. Don't take advice from somebody who hasn't got skin in the game. And it's the same with Adim. Integrity requires that there's some skin in the game as well. That's why it's important that even in business, there's an effort to align the interests of managers with shareholders, that the managers should also have skin in the game. If the bonus system, if the compensation system is only upside with no downside, that's a problem. Because what's the difficulty? What does a manager lose, or what does a director lose from making bad decisions? So he doesn't get his bonus. That's okay. That's not great. But everybody else actually suffers losses. So if you're truly going to align interests, there's got to be benefit and loss. For an aid to be believed, the A has to have something at risk. You can't be a witness and have nothing at risk. Me too, this also happened to me, so I'm destroying your reputation. Have you got proof? No, I don't have proof, but here's the story, this is what happened, and you've got public Lashon Hara, that the witness has got the platform to give public Lashon Hara, and it's thrown out of court, and so what? That's the end of the story for him or her, but not for the accused. Not so in the laws of the Torah. A witness has to know if you're coming to give evidence, you've got to commit yourself to time and place. Because if another set of witnesses were to come and say you weren't there at that time and that you couldn't have seen this happen, whether it happened or not, you couldn't have seen it happen, you're going to get exactly the same punishment that you caused. You've got skin in the game now to be upright and honest. And that's the idea of Edut She'ata יכול, להזימה. And says Tosfos, although in this case we're not actually implementing the exact same thing that you wanted to cause, but there's the whipping, there's the malchus. And the malchus in this case serves the same deterrent, that in the event that you're discovered to be a false witness using the principles of hazama, in this particular case where we can't give you what you wanted to cause, but you do get malchus. And we'll see on Amud Beis, the Gemara says the source of these malchus are from two different places, and those are the psukim that we came up with in the beginning. If it was for lo ta'aneh b'reach ha'ed shaker, for which there aren't malchut because it's a lav she'ein bo ma'aseh, it's not an active transgression. If it were from there, then we would say malchus has nothing to do with edim zomimim. It's the general law of malchus that applies to every case where you transgress. But we have a special posuk. Ki yeh riv ben anashim v'nishul hamishpat v'shaftu v'tzdiku et hatzadik v'yishiru et harasha. The Gemara says that's talking about edim zomimim, and there it specifically says arba'im yakenu, to teach us that in those cases, as Rashi explains on Daf Beis, on Amud Beis, in those cases where you cannot implement the same punishment to the witnesses that they wanted to cause the accused, in those cases you substitute the punishment with malchus, and that's a sufficient deterrent that gives the person sufficient risk in giving false evidence to assure us, to give us some kind of basis on which to accept that the evidence that they're giving is true. Because although we can't accept the statements of people who have no skin in the game, when a person is at risk for what he says, they have a different degree of reliability.